Hello and welcome back to the Auditing Antics podcast. So today, Michelle and I are going to break down what it means to be a coder versus what it means to be an auditor. Or maybe more specifically, I should say, Michelle, what the different roles are and what we're looking for.
I think we should also touch a bit on what does it take to become an auditor? So transition from a coder to an auditor.
Mhm. Well, and right now in the industry, there's so much talk about this because, we have a lot of organizations, for example, that we've seen just lay off entire departments.
Yeah.
And they think that, they say outsourcing, but we know it's going offshore. We've seen that play out in the past in very negative ways. And I think it's just
Yes.
going to be this cycle, but we've got to get through the here and now where people think this is the new best thing. They're going to save all this money. They're still going to remain financially stable. We know a lot of that is not accurate.
Yeah.
So when we are looking at this from that viewpoint, it's one of those things where, from my perspective, I've noticed a lot of things over the years when I have had to train people.
hmm
And, I have heard a lot of times, and definitely inside of larger organizations, there's this thought process that somebody who's really good at coding will automatically be really good at auditing.
Yeah, they definitely aren't interchangeable. While the skills of coding are necessary to audit, you have to have the ability to take that deeper dive into what documentation is telling us. And I think that sometimes that mindset shift is missed between
Mhm.
coding and auditing. So if somebody's saying, "Oh, you can code, then you can audit." Yes, you can, but you're going to have to develop some additional skills that come outside of just that daily code selection that you're doing, reviewing notes, assigning the code. You're creating that claim essentially and sending it out the door. So they really aren't interchangeable concepts, and you have to be able to expand that skill to something outside the realm of coding.
Mhm. Well, and that's a good point because when we think about auditing, let's break down a little bit those differences. And for me, I think one of the biggest things is that with auditing, we're looking at a whole picture. We're
hmm
looking outside the box. We're not just looking at that note on that day and saying, this note here supports X, Y, and Z.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
actually going in, looking between the lines at different, compliance issues like copy and paste, split shared, incident two. To an extent, that should be a part of coding, but a lot of times people are just doing what they've been directed to do.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
coding being production driven, it's a very production driven environment.
mhm.
It takes away not because coders are bad at identifying these things. It's just when you have that time crunch placed upon you on a daily basis, you have to pick and choose what you're looking at. Because I
Mhm.
know that when I was in the production coding environment and I was training other coders, and you always have those ones that want to like come over here, come over here, come over here. And it's like, you can't do that. You have to focus on what's in front of you. So the auditing allows you to broaden that scope and
Yeah.
start taking that deeper dive. I know sometimes when I am doing audits and I give results back, a big example of this, I would say, is the data section. I will get rebuttals from the coding department because they will say, well, this is here, this is supported. And when you go back and look at it, I had looked at previous notes, and unfortunately I put this in my comments on the audit, and I don't know, do they just not read, they must not read the audit
Mhm.
comment. um but they will have been results that were previously reviewed by the provider. So it's just like this different mindset that we have when we're auditing than when we're out there production coding and getting those claims out the door.
Yeah. And one thing I want to make clear as well, so when we talk about this shift from coding to auditing, it's not that we're saying that this isn't something that realistically can be pursued, or this isn't something that, everybody can't do. What we're saying is that it does take some additional, whether it be education, hands-on experience. I know for me, a lot of it is when I'm working with somebody new in the industry or new to a position, it's recognizing certain skills that people have that aren't even actually related to coding that
Yeah.
can help strengthen an auditor in the work that they're doing. So it's just what we're saying is it's not a straight crosswalk into auditing. There's some additional things and skills that are definitely
Mhm.
going to be required.
Yeah. So let's take a couple minutes and talk about how can a coder start thinking like an auditor. So obviously, at a certain point in your career, if you're a coder that wants to become an auditor, you're going to have to start training yourself to take this deeper dive. Now, this may be something that you have to do on your own time. If you are a production coder, I'm pretty sure your employer is going to notice if you start taking the double amount of time on charts
Hmm.
to review and start doing these things. But how you start thinking about how you start thinking like an auditor, the first thing that I always tell people is you have got to level up your knowledge on guidelines. You are going to have to start dedicating time to reviewing guidelines. So, E&M guidelines, you need to know those frontwards, backwards, know those definitions that they give out there, know what they're saying without them saying it. Like, I know sometimes people get like focused in on what we have on the MDM table, for example.
Hmm.
And you have to be able to think outside the box in that and apply it in scenarios that aren't explicitly listed in the MDM table. So
Yeah.
dedicate time to reviewing E&M guidelines, ICD-10 guidelines. How many times in our auditing are we seeing deficiencies on how ICD-10 guidelines are being applied in coding? So there's definitely a need for that across the board just in coding roles in general. Things
Yeah.
like NCCI edit policies. If you don't know, the NCCI edit has a whole policy that is dedicated to, those rules, use of modifiers, and have guidelines around how we report things. Become familiar with those. And I know you and I have preached this before, but learn how to navigate your payers' websites, learn how to
Hmm.
research, and know how to go and get that information that you need.
Yeah, I was going to say in that situation, it's one of those things where even if you listen back on any podcast episode that we have, if it's a certain subject we're talking about, it's because we have base knowledge of typically CMS policy, AMA guidelines, things like that.
Mhm.
It's not just that it's something that's our opinion or we read an article. We even did an episode in the past related to what a good resource is, for example. So
Yeah.
being familiar, knowing how to deep dive. And one way that you can practice this as a coder actually is doing the research before you ask a question.
Mhm.
And that's something when I've been in like a team lead position or an educator position. One of the big things, and Michelle, I know you did this too as well,
Mm.
is that even though it was easier for me to just answer the question quick, I started to say, what do you think it is and what's your resource? And I wasn't doing that to be a pain to the people that I was working with, but I wanted to see, okay, what is their ability to look into this and find these things? And,
Yeah.
over the years, I've seen different people that I've come across working with for, little bits of time, and I can tell the people who continue to just ask the person next to them or ask their lead instead of, really owning what it is that they're doing. And, that is appropriate for a coder. That is something that, is going to make somebody a strong coder, actually, which will lead you right into auditing. So know what those are, refer to them often. If you have a question, go with your resource and what you think it is, then take it from there at that point.
Mhm.
Now, in addition to that, when we're looking at day to day notes, so if somebody's a coder, what could they do, Michelle, when they're going in and auditing an E&M or coding an E&M? What
Hmm.
could they start to recognize in documentation that's going to give a little bit different lens in that situation?
Hmm. So first of all, it's really important that you're looking at the note entirely. I'm not saying take 10 minutes to read. Yeah, you've got to be a fast reader here,
Hmm.
but I mean, I know we all have fallen into that trap of, oh, new guidelines, let's just go down to assessment and plan. No, we cannot skip those things. So you need to start reading the note in its entirety. Look at the assessment and plan. This is a huge one. Does it match the diagnosis codes that are being reported? And when we say does it match is how many times do we see that big list of diagnosis codes? Like the provider has blown in like 15 diagnosis codes. And then when you look at the plan, only 2 of those have been addressed.
Hmm.
You can't report all of those things as problems addressed. I actually had an encounter yesterday where I was auditing, and the provider did blow in like 20 diagnosis codes and addressed one thing,
Hmm.
one stable chronic condition, and they were trying to bill a higher level. And I know it was driven off the fact that they had all of these other diagnosis codes listed, and just because they're there doesn't mean that they were addressed. So you need to start evaluating that. Is there enough detail in the note to support medical necessity for the E&M level of service or procedure that was performed? I know with EMRs, a big issue that we're seeing, Stephanie, is the assessment and plans that just show orders.
Hmm.
What was the provider's thought process? Start working through those types of things. And then last, start learning how to articulate your findings. I know this is the one thing that a lot of new auditors start with. It's not something that came naturally to me, being able to articulate. But if you're out there coding, something very quick and easy you could do that I don't think would take a lot of additional time that will help start that mind set shift is to just in your mind talk through why you've selected this level of service. And I'm not talking about the high level, one stable chronic condition, two tests ordered, prescription drug management. Actually, look at the note and say the provider addressed stable hypertension, gave a refill of this medication so that you're actually seeing what about this note is supporting the code that you
Hmm.
are that you're billing. And then this is where it all kind of starts come together. So you start practicing your articulation of findings, of why you're selecting the code. Not only that, but when you do get audited, if you can articulate like that, you can really defend your coding. You can go to bat. I know that I have gotten some wild audit findings when
Hmm.
there was a time, a crossover time for me where I was working as an auditor, but my full-time job was production coding. And so it was kind of crazy sometimes getting some of these audit findings and things, but I was able to articulate why I had made a decision that I had made, and I was able to defend it and overturn some of those audit findings. None of us
Yeah,
are
and
perfect.
that's really important because well, first, that's another way that a coder can practice when it comes to this
Yes.
communication. Thinking about, not that you have to be able to communicate immediately with a physician
Yeah.
or a practitioner because you may not be in a position where you're going to be given that ability to practice that. But
Hmm.
you can work on how clear you're being with your coworkers, with your current management. Like you were saying, internal audits. If you don't understand or you don't agree, don't just say, well, I don't agree with this. Come
Hmm.
back with very strong descriptions related to what it is that you saw in the note, why you
Hmm.
were making that decision. Another thing, too, that helps me sometimes, especially if I'm looking at something where we can tell what the provider or the coder were thinking when I'm auditing, it can help me too to think of it in the reverse way. So if it's something where I think it's incorrect, stop and think to yourself, okay, what would you like to see? What would make this correct in
Hmm.
your mind? And again, thinking through not only our checklist of guidelines, but thinking through it in that narrative form of what is there, what you can pull from the note, what technically does support it, and then going from there forward.
Yeah.
Now, I think another thing too, it really can be helpful to get input from other people and to be
Yes.
open. And I've
Yes.
had that in the industry as well. I've had some people, even when I'm at a conference, for example, that say, hey, I've known you for years from coming to the conference, and I really would just love your opinion. This is kind of where I feel that I'm at with my career, what my goals are. Is this realistic? And just, being open and talking about, okay, what is the end goal, or what is your goal for 1 year or
Yeah.
2 years? Because that's what's going to help you to understand what you need to do now to obtain that goal in the future.
Hmm. And in the mindset of practicing skills, if you are so lucky to have this, do I hate to say this because when I was in banking, it was like, ah, but do role play. Practice those conversations. And because why not be uncomfortable in a controlled environment? Um, and
That's funny. I don't know how I could do that without laughing.
oh,
It
you can't.
reminds me when we were young and we had to practice our stupid, presentations for school in
Language
front of
arts.
mom and dad, or
Um,
you
even
guys, and I'm like, I could never do this. It's
Do you remember when you had to give the presentation for your online speech class on how to use a Keurig? How many
yeah,
times did we have to restart that video because we just could not, as a whole, take it seriously?
it
Uh,
was awful. It was worse doing that in front of you guys. Maybe do it in front of a mirror.
But I have practiced that way. When I started physician education, I know it sounds so stupid, but I studied that material that I was going to be presenting to those doctors. And on
Mm.
my drives, I had a 30-minute commute each way. I was practicing what I was going to say out loud. And then sometimes I would get in this mindset of practicing and I'd get home and I'd be thinking about something and I'd answer myself out loud. And James would be like, "What?" And I'm like, "Just never mind." Just but practice, 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 and have somebody that, if you have that person who can give you really quality feedback and you can kind of get past some of the awkwardness and silliness of it, it's really helpful to have these conversations and start practicing these things before you're in a real life scenario and have somebody who can give you feedback on maybe give more detail here. I didn't quite understand this comment where you were relating this back to this specific note. Find that person who can give you that feedback because you have to work on becoming an effective communicator to be a good auditor. You have to be able to actively listen to your providers. So when we're auditing, we're not just always like, how are we going to get you today? And be like, we're looking for your mistakes. No, we are part of a team trying to help in them strengthen their documentation and create a scenario where they don't have to defend themselves.
Mhm,
We're not the gotchas. We are this is what we found and this is how we want to help you make it better.
mhm.
We're just a
Well,
team.
and when you're talking through this, one of the things I was thinking of is if we just think of the industry and the fact that everyone has access, for example, into like a local AAPC chapter, look at what is there in your current area, because I know, for example, the chapters typically, depending on where you are, but all the chapters I've been involved in, at one point or another, come to a cross in the roads where they're like, hey, if people don't volunteer to be these positions in our chapter, then we may have to close it.
Yeah.
So there's different opportunities like that where no, you don't have to get up and give an entire presentation, but maybe you need to be the one to prep and make sure that there's an opening statement for the beginning of the
Yeah.
presentation. Or maybe you will do the opening for the speaker,
Yes.
or reach out and get speakers who will come to the chapter meetings, which again requires all of that communication, that
Communication.
professional communication. So
Yeah.
there's different ways to think outside the box where you don't have to essentially wait for it to fall in your lap in the position you're in. Look for that opportunity in your day-to-day work.
And I also think those meetings are a great resource for networking.
Mhm,
I know a lot of times, like I know the hospital facility that I worked in, they started a chapter specifically for their employees.
mhm,
But that brought together not just the coding department, it brought together the CDI department, the separate like overarching compliance department. So there's a really good opportunity to network and maybe connect with somebody who's not the person that you sit next to every day or not the person that you report to on a
mhm,
regular basis. So I really think there is value to attending AAPC meetings. I mean, it was through AAPC that I made my connections for my first job. When I
mhm,
was testing, I connected with the proctors and, introduced myself and shared with them my career goals. And later, when I got certified, I reached back out to them. And, a couple months later, they had some positions open up. And that's how I got my first job was networking through the AAPC.
mhm.
So,
Definitely, yeah. And
that's
I
an
mean,
excellent
sometimes a
suggestion.
HEMA too, if
Yep.
you're associated with a hospital, you'll be able to look at doing things with the HEMA group. The other thing is to remember if you have any connection to a HEMA, the different states have their own associations as well. So you can be involved in, local meetings like that and things of that nature. But I really hope with this episode we gave some ideas related to what people can be thinking of, because I'm hearing a lot of feedback right now in the industry that, we always hear the feedback that the industry is oversaturated with like newly credentialed people.
Yeah.
But everybody's going to have their own path. There is a way. It's just a matter of being flexible. You can't go into something with that mindset that, the way you thought of it 6 months ago is exactly how that's going to occur. And when we think about the conversations that are happening with people that are seeing, outsourcing for cheap labor, things like
Hmm.
that. Um,
AI.
yeah, AI. Those things, it just means we pivot.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of the same way that, I've been talking with some friends lately about, and of course, my own personal life. And, it's one of those things where, no, things do not look anything now like I thought they would as a parent. And,
Yeah.
what happens with raising our kids and then transitioning into parenting adult children, which you don't really get to parent. It's like I have to constantly pause and tell myself, okay, it's a pivot. You don't have full control over this. So, what do you have control over?
Mhm.
What could you focus on? What would you like to happen? And how do you
Absolutely.
work towards it?
Yeah, and I think that's a great reminder because oftentimes we set these goals and we're like, "Oh, this is what I want to do."
Can only be this.
Yeah, and you can really miss an opportunity to grow. And while maybe it's a detour to where you want to go, should be open to taking it and remain flexible
Mhm.
because a skill is a skill
Yeah,
and is beneficial no matter what.
yeah, I agree. All right, so we're going to go ahead and end it here for this week. I hope everybody's having a good week. I know for myself, I'm very glad that we've had a lot more sunshine. Towards the end of our
Ugh.
winters, we tend to get some more rain and whatnot, but the sun can really do some good when you're stuck inside all the time.
I know. Unfortunately, with it warming up in Florida, so I live on a lake and we get these lovely things called midge flies and they have like taken over. So That's the one downside. Like, I was driving down the road the other day and I just like went through this plume of bugs, and I'm like, oh, I'm really glad my windows are closed.
Don't want to inhale those.
No, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good week, and we will see you back with us next episode.